The Archdiocese of Chicago is a vibrant and diverse faith community. We celebrate our faith through worship, evangelization, and reaching out to the needy. Welcome to Catholic Chicago.
Good morning. Welcome to Catholic Chicago on WNDZ, 750 AM. You can also get us on youtube.com/Catholic Chicago, youtube.com/Catholic Chicago. I'm Father Greg Sakowitz, the rector of Holy Name Cathedral here in Chicago. And to my left, co-host Mark Teresi, who's doing the 175th anniversary as our leader. Also does many, many other ministries within our cathedral. Good morning, Mark. How are you?
Good morning. Very good. Very good. What a beautiful morning.
Beautiful morning. Now, we are taping this program on Tuesday, April 23rd. Playback is on Thursday today, April 25th. And folks, I have to say, I'm a diehard Chicago White Sox fan.
Uh-oh.
We are awful. We are
And
awful.
I'm a Cubs fan.
The Cubs are a playoff contender.
Yes, they sure are.
And the White Sox, folks, at this rate, the Sox will win under 25 games of the year. They just can't possibly be that bad. So I'm trying to be a little bit optimistic, but we have a tremendous program lined up. And Mark, take it away.
Yeah, what a positive note to begin with. ACTA Publications began in 1957 as a publisher of books and audio video resources for religious education and spiritual development. It's been broadened its editorial scope to include sports, social justice and community organizing, caregiving, grief and mourning, storytelling and novels, and children's books. They publish 8 to 10 new titles per year and have a backlist of over 400 books and CDs.
Which are all outstanding,
Yes.
by the way.
ACTA titles are non-academic and they're aimed at the average reader. One of the books recently published by ACTA Publications is Less Helping Them, More Healing You, The Transcendent Gifts of an Ancient Spiritual Practice. With this book, author Gene Kelly demonstrates how the ancient, forgiving, and still relevant practice of spiritual reading, lectio divina, offers gifts that transcend trying times, including a slower pace, personal space, and the graces of self-knowledge and self-acceptance. The structure of reading and reflecting, responding, and receiving can help even the most distressed among us practice detachment, often the most loving forgiveness we can offer others and ourselves. Joining us now via Zoom from her home in Columbus, Ohio, is author Gene Kelly. Gene, welcome to Catholic Chicago.
Thank you very much. Thank you,
Good
Father
morning,
and Mark,
Gene.
for giving me this opportunity to talk to you and to your audience.
Now, as we talked before the program started, when you mentioned you were from Columbus, Ohio, I said you have to be with the Ohio State Buckeyes.
Yes, that's right.
And you were once part of Ohio State?
I was once editor of the Alumni magazine, but I should point out that I have also a degree. I have 2 degrees from Ohio State University, but the other Ohio University is where I have my PhD. So got to give the Bobcats a shout out.
It always makes me smile when one of the football players says, "I'm from the Ohio State." The Ohio State, and that's a great, great, great school for many years. When I hear the Columbus, I think of that. Now, it's a very interesting book you have written. First of all, Gene, how did you come, 2 things, how did you come to writing the book? How did you even come to that title?
Well, I think it was a little complicated because the book weaves together multiple strands in a continuous narrative. It's not a collection of essays, it is a narrative. And the 3 strands are my personal story, which is a spiritual memoir. It also includes journalistic research because that's my background, about enmeshed relationships. And then it also gives demonstrates applied lectio divina or spiritual reading, how I practiced it, the wisdom I found in text from all sorts of great spiritual thinkers, but also in kind of everyday encounters with music and art. And so we were, it's about less helping them, more healing you, because that was my situation and the realization that I came to by using the practice, that I was defining myself by how I helped others. And that was really unhealthy. And so that's kind of where the title comes from.
Now, you can never separate the author of a title of a book. So what was part of your story that brought you to that point to write the book?
So I am a writer by training, but in my profession, I'm a journalism professor at Otterbein University. So writing has always been important to me. And I think that's one of the reasons I really connected with when I learned at a retreat at my parish. I'm a longtime parishioner at St. John Newman in Sunbury, Ohio. Learned there was such a thing as reading as a form of prayer. And especially when I learned that the third step, which in my book I call the response step, is an opportunity to kind of process things with writing. And so that's how I learned it and started using it, and the processing was that I needed to do was I was enmeshed in some very unbalanced relationships. At first, most notably with an alcoholic spouse who had no interest in recovery. But I was so focused on helping him, even though he didn't want to be helped, that I kind of lost myself. Mm-hmm. And so that's what the book, I actually started writing a lot to help me process the situation I was in. I did a lot of spiritual journaling during that time as part of this practice. And that's then some of that came out in the book, some of that learning and the text I found and the spiritual wisdom that became accessible to me in that really difficult time.
Now, maybe for our listeners, I am fascinated with the comment that you had, your need to help others made you vulnerable.
It did.
What did that vulnerability look like for our listeners in case they're in a spot that you were
right.
in?
Well, it's funny too, because it's really hard to change long ingrained patterns. And sometimes some of those patterns are like from our childhood. We don't even realize them. So I like to joke that I wrote this book to help people I don't know who have not asked for my help, who don't even realize they need help. Mm-hmm. Because I'm recognizing in myself that is the very definition of unbalanced helping. And I think I was long thought that my faith taught me helping as a form of charity, and that I should always help, always make my needs secondary to other people. But what I realized was I was helping in order to be loved. Mm-hmm. And I was tying too much of my self-esteem and my value to how people reacted to my help or didn't react to it. And so, and when you're involved with an addict of any sort, and again, I talk about several unbalanced relationships in the book, you can never help enough. Mm-hmm. But you end up trying to control things, and, you're all the while you're denying that there's a problem. Mm-hmm. And that's what's so hard about that kind of helping. That's what makes it unhealthy.
Now, Jean, what you're saying is very, very profound, because I've been a priest now almost 45 years. I've dealt with many people who've been in your situation, past and present. What was the moment in your life in which you had a metanoia, your eyes opened up and said, I can't do this anymore, this is dysfunctional, this is not healthy? Because here you're going along helping, I'll change him, I'm doing this out of love. But what was when did the light bulb go in when you woke up one morning and said, this has to stop?
Well, I think when I look retrospectively, it was never one moment, but an accumulation of moments. And it, I had tried everything, been in therapy, et cetera. And I think the burning platform was when I realized that the situation I was raising my daughters in was so dysfunctional that because I love them, I needed to make a change.
Beautiful.
And I think that's really prompted how I came to that moment. And everyone has a different moment, and it's really about realizing the pain that you've denied for a long time. It bubbles up, and you can't deny it anymore.
And it's interesting. I want you to react to this statement. So my wife, when I think it was her 60th birthday, said, "I'm choosing to give myself the gift of not associating with folks that suck the energy out of me." And I thought that was quite an interesting statement. And I've seen her do it with a lot of grace. She said, "I don't wish people ill. I just know
Right.
I cannot live that way." Can you react to that?
Well, in my spiritual reading practices, I had discovered texts by people ranging from Meister Eckhart, the German mystic, to Thomas Merton, to Teresa of Avila. And they actually were all teaching that detachment, this idea that there's such a thing as loving detachment. It is accepting people where they are, not where you want them to be. And sometimes that means you cannot have close encounters with them or be with them in the same room, except for short periods of time. And you are, as I talk about in the book, I realized at some point that I was actually doing those people a favor sometimes, that they would not have to keep up appearances with me any longer. They would not have to take my unsolicited help any longer. And so that was, and then once you establish those boundaries for yourself, and you realize the gifts of those boundaries, then you can do it again and maintain the boundaries.
Yeah.
Because, some people that are difficult people are going to test those boundaries, and they'll keep coming and trying to bring you back in. And if you take time, I talk about sometimes waiting actually changes things. If you take time for yourself, and that's why I love Lectio Divina, it gives you that pace that's really slow. You take a moment, you step back, and you evaluate why you're helping them or why you feel guilted into having a relationship with somebody is difficult. If you can just take that moment of pause, and that's one of the reasons I continue to practice spiritual reading on a regular basis, because it reminds me of God's love for me every day, and that I do not always need the love of every other person in my life in every moment. And so it allows me to have the courage to do that. It's not easy.
Yeah, I find very fascinating the very title, Less Helping Them, More Healing You, the Transcendent Gifts of an Ancient Spiritual Practice. If we couple along with what Mark said about his wife on his 60th birthday, to be around people who are less, I call it negative energy, who just suck the life out of you. But now in all that you're saying, before we go to break, Jean, is what did you learn about yourself from writing this book?
Well, there's a chapter where I talk about the Enneagram, and I realize I am a helper, and there really isn't anything wrong with that. But if I'm helping other people to reconvince myself of God's love for me, then I'm doing it to an extreme. And so I will always be a helper. That's why I said, I know I wrote this book to help people that haven't asked for my help. And that's okay, right? That's what I learned most of all. But it just tells me I have to be careful about that. And I have to always be checking my motivations for doing things and giving myself the space and grace to maybe not help all the time.
One quick story, and that was when I was a young priest, ordained back in 1979, about 100 years ago. I was at Church of the Holy Spirit in Schaumburg, and my pastor was Father George Kane, who is still living today. Father Kane is now 98 years old, the class of 1951. He's the second oldest priest in the Archdiocese behind Bishop Jack Gorman. And I remember talking to George, I was 28, 29 years old, and George said, if a priest ever says to you he was ordained solely for the love of God, that's baloney. He said, if a priest were to say, oh, I was ordained only for the love of God. He said, no way. He said, priests who are ordained, sisters, helping profession, we have our own needs to be met regarding helping. But he said there's nothing wrong moving toward priesthood because you enjoy helping people, but just admit that because when you do help people, your needs are being met,
Right.
their needs are being met. It's a gift from God. It's a win-win. So what you're really saying, Gene, is fascinating. You came to a better understanding of your own life. You are a helper. There's nothing wrong with that, but how do we balance in the helping? Mark, take us to break.
WNDZ 750. I'm going to hold up your book so people can see it, Gene.
It's Less Helping Them, More Healing You by Gene Kelly. And you're listening to WNDZ 750 AM. Father Greg Sakowicz, Mark Teresi. We are going to break. Do not touch that dial.
Community is core to Catholic Charity's founding mission. For more than 100 years, we have met people and families where they are, serving anyone in need, regardless of their faith, gender, race, or ethnicity. As our world absorbs the economic, political, and social aftershocks of the pandemic, 50% or more of the 6 million people living in Cook and Lake counties have little or no savings. They are a paycheck away from zero. We are deeply grateful to everyone in the Catholic Charities community who partners with us to alleviate the suffering of the people we serve and offer them a better path forward. We are witnessing a message of mercy and hope to a world very much in need. Learn more at CatholicCharities.net.
I feel special. I feel great. I got good grades.
We've seen a huge surge in our kids now meeting or exceeding grade level. Come check us out. You may have never thought we were an option before.
Our school communities provide students with academic excellence and character education in a supportive and stable learning environment. Come see for yourself. Visit archchicago.org/findaschool.
We're back, WNDZ 750 AM, Catholic Chicago. You go to youtube.com/Catholic Chicago, where Gene Kelly wrote a fascinating book, The Transcendent Gift of an Ancient Spiritual Practice, Less Helping Them, More Helping You. Gene, a question came to my mind as people are listening to this book, and you've kind of cracked it open in terms of looking at boundaries and the spiritual development that you have. Many people probably are struggling with that, and maybe one thing they have found in dealing with an alcoholic spouse or someone, a daughter, a son, a friend, is Al-Anon. How does Al-Anon, how would you envision Al-Anon fitting in? How would you figure your book fits as a wonderful support for if they're at Al-Anon?
I actually used Al-Anon literature in Lectio Divina, and against all these helps are important because I really push back on the idea of self-help. I think you really need community, and wherever you find that community, whether it's in recovery groups, in text, and I found spiritual guides in text, but also in Al-Anon. So I think if you're at that point where you recognize that, I think you're going to need all those support communities for your journey. And I also know that a lot of people don't even recognize, or they're confused and they don't even know where to go. And that's where I try to be really kind of gentle in the book about revealing my story and how I really didn't even know what was going on because denial is so strong. So it's great if you're at the point where you're seeking out recovery or the sport of Al-Anon and others. But if you're not, doing some reading is very helpful. Giving yourself, as I say, the pace, space, and grace to heal, which is slow yourself down. Start thinking about what is going on in your own emotions, your own needs. And I found many, many graces in the spiritual practice. That's why I'm bringing the book to an audience of all faith backgrounds, because I think it offers amazing gifts.
Now, not only does the book do a beautiful job, Jean, of sharing your story, and I always say this, prayer is not only talking to God, prayer is listening to God. And your book is also so grounded in prayer and spirituality. But a phrase you used earlier, and maybe define for our listeners who may not know, is what is lectio divina, and why is it important as part of your spirituality and part of the book?
So that's the Latin, basically translates loosely as spiritual reading. And so in the book, I just break the practice down into 4 steps: read, reflect, respond, receive. And then I break them down into kind of smaller steps. And that's what structures the book. And there are some prompts at the end of the book, if people do want to take lessons I learned, or even some of the texts I introduced to them, as a way to it's a slow reading process. It is reading 4 times with different intent. And you mentioned the importance of listening. And I think that's where those gifts come to us, is the last step, that receive, is we are just giving ourselves silence and pause to listen to our heart, to God, however you interpret after doing those first 3 steps, what gifts you discover.
And I would imagine sometimes you have to listen to people close to you. So I remember my second pastor. My first pastor, I was a youth minister at a parish, very difficult situation. I moved to the second parish, great pastor, and he stopped me one day, sat me in his office, and said, "What's going on here?" He said, "You're wounded, and you haven't gotten over the 7 years in your prior assignment." I didn't even know I was wounded until he held up the mirror and said, "Here you are, you're wounded." Anybody in your life that was a gift to you and was able to say to you, enough, you're wounded?
Oh, I know probably there were. Denial is a really effective coping strategy. And the longer you do it, the stronger your denial is. And at least in my situation, and my situation might be different than other people, I had to discover that for myself. But then, of course, once I started making progress, I had found support in people closest to me. One of the interesting phenomenons I have when I am selling the book or talking to people about the book is very often folks want to buy it for someone else. That they know is suffering in this unbalanced situation. And I encourage them to get the book, read it for themselves, so they understand better the patterns of enmeshed relationships, so they can therefore be more accepting of wherever their loved one is in this process. Because the risk is, if you try to hand somebody a book and give them advice when they haven't asked for it, you will actually lose their trust.
Yeah.
And so the people that I loved and trusted might have been telling me this, but I was not going to believe it. I had to come to that burning platform myself, had to understand it myself. And I know enough people that are in that situation that I try to be very gentle and careful. That's why on like my Facebook page, I just kind of share the wisdom. I'm trying to share what I learned more so than telling people what they should do about it.
What I find very fascinating, Jean, is that when people are in denial, there's a real sense of feeling trapped or no other way out. They go into this denial, but the real hard denial is he or she feels trapped and there's no other way out of the situation. There's no light at the end of the tunnel. So you keep in the sense this daily thing of day in and day out of denial, but it's like a car trapped in the snow. Either the tires are spinning, and the more you spin the tires, you think you're getting out of the ditch from the snow, but you're going deeper and deeper, and you need help. Someone to push you from behind or a tow truck. And I think that was in your life and so many other people's lives, is saying, I can't do this anymore. Something has to change, or I'm going to literally break or snap.
And again, if you're in the car, you're thinking you're making progress. That's the
Right.
great irony of denial. It's
That's
the
it.
outside people that see you're stuck. And that's why
great-
it is really hard to help somebody in this situation. I would realize it only after I did something that was extreme helping. But so that's where I talk about the gifts of spiritual reading, were in actually a progression, which was self-knowledge first, then self-acceptance, and then self-gift and love. And I had to go in that order in order to get there. And one of the things that I tell people that want to buy the book for somebody else is not even just in a situation where somebody might be involved with an addict, but we all have really difficult people in our lives. And one of my sessions of spiritual reading that I share in the book, that third step response can be prayer. And for me, it was often writing. So I wrote a prayer that I called the detachment prayer. And I've gotten a lot of strong feedback from a wide audience about that prayer as something that helps them know that they can put that person in God's hands and not try to necessarily directly help them, that person they see in denial.
Now, Jean, what a wonderful opportunity that the parish offered that retreat that you went
Yes.
on. Was there an aha moment for you on that retreat?
I just enjoyed the practice a lot, and I was also got away. It was a like one day retreat away from my family, but it was just more. I think, as I said, it was a very slow process that I only understand retrospectively. That I was essentially being prepared for a later aha moment by having the structure of this practice in my life, that I could get strength and love on a regular basis from it.
Beautiful.
Now, before we close, Jean, the book, of course, entitled Less Helping Them, More Healing You, The Transcendent Gifts of an Ancient Spiritual Practice by ACTA Publications. How can people purchase the book?
Yes, I can give you an 800 number,
Good.
and
Please give
there's
it.
people standing by right now to take orders. We're also offering, the publisher's also offering a 10% discount if you mention the show. And that phone number is 1-800-397-2282.
That number once again.
ACTA. 1-800-397-2282. And then in addition, there would be the ACTA website that you're showing. That's another way to order.
So ACTA Publications, presumably.com. And so I want to thank in a very special way Jean Kelly. You've been a phenomenal guest.
Yes, thank you.
You've spoken so from the heart. And trust me, Jean, many people listening can resonate with your story, because we are all wounded. We're all wounded healers. So God bless you. Keep up the great ministry. How's the weather out there in Columbus, Ohio?
It's going to be a gorgeous day, a little cool for my taste, but
Well, thank you very
sunny.
much, Jean. And also special thanks to co-host for this first half, Mark Teresi, Father Greg Sackwitz, listening to WNDZ, 750 AM. Also get us on youtube.com/CatholicChicago. Stay with us for part 2. And again, do not touch that dial.